People and purpose are key drivers of performance, but are most often overlooked. The reshaping of our society is demanding a more engaged workforce to achieve on all fronts. Yet, most organizations often don't know how. They are forced to rethink what they stand for, the stories they tell, and how they are articulating and living on their purpose. I'm your host, Michelle Roberts, and welcome to Purpose First. Learn how top business leaders think, act, and achieve more by turning businesses into movements, by putting people and purpose first.
I am super excited and pleased to welcome Ari Weinzweig as my guest today. How are you, Ari?
I'm doing pretty good, as good as one can be doing in the middle of all this pandemic and in the middle of February in Michigan, when It's kind of cold and not too conducive to sitting outside, to say the least. But
I hear you.
All things considered, I feel very fortunate.
I hear you. Ari, along with his business partner, Paul Saginaw, founded Zingerman's Deli in 1982. Since grown to 12 different businesses, Zingerman's community of businesses in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and now has hundreds of employees and they do millions of dollars a year. But it doesn't end there. They not only make a healthy profit, but focus on their people and purpose first, making Zingerman's a movement. I have to say that I have been to Ann Arbor many times. My husband, his family, he grew up there and his family is still there. And so one of the first memories I have of going to Ann Arbor is going to Zingerman's.
All right.
So very cool. So thank you again, Ari, for being here.
Oh yeah, my pleasure. Thank you for talking to me.
I should also note that Ari is an amazingly talented writer. He is author of works including Zingerman's Guide to Giving Great Service, Zingerman's Guide to Good Eating, Guide to Good Leading, and most recently published Working Through Hard Times, Life and Leadership Learnings from 2020, as 2020 has all been a challenging year, was a challenging year for almost everyone. So again, so great to have you here. Since I'm in Rochester, I'm in upstate New York, I can definitely understand the whole snow and not being able to get out. I love being outside in nature, as similar as you, I think, as well. Correct?
Yeah. I still run outside every day, so I'll get out there, but it's more enjoyable for me when it's like 80 than when it's 18.
Yep. So why are we living in this tundra?
Well, that's a good question. I like Ann Arbor. There's something that's, good about everywhere and not so good about everywhere. And I like all the rest of it. I just don't love the weather, but it is what it is.
Yeah. And Ann Arbor it's a magical place. I mean, being that I've been there multiple times, it's just such a community aspect. Everyone, you can just feel that everyone truly cares about one another. And it's definitely different than other places that I've ever been to.
Well, yeah, I guess I feel the same, or I don't guess, I do feel the same way. That's a big part of why I'm here. And so I feel very fortunate to be in such a positive community, especially during a challenging time.
Yeah, absolutely. We all know that this pandemic has been hard, especially in the food business. Much like where you are in. I would love to hear from you and tell all the listeners around, what is this community of businesses? Elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah. So this is work so Paul and I, as you said, opened the deli in 1982. And then in 1993, over the course of about a year, is the first time that we wrote out a vision in the way that we now do it regularly. And you probably saw the e-news that came out last week, had a whole piece about it. But that vision was called Zingerman's 2009, and it described our future that we were committing to pursue, that was going to be 15 years down the road, which seemed like forever at the time. And that vision described a community of businesses where each business would have its own identity, and each would have a managing partner in it that had a passion for what that business did. But each would have its own unique specialty, and that we would operate as one organization with these semi-autonomous parts. So it was a long year of trying to figure out what that future was going to look like. But I have a very strong commitment or passion for doing business, like I said, in the place that one lives. I think it's a different feel when you're not there. It's a little too colonial for me. I'm not judging others, but it's not my style. And then also, I've always been drawn and continue to be drawn to the businesses where there's really just one really special one. And I don't mean it's evil to open 5 of the same thing, but it sort of loses a little bit of the magic, the passion, the energy, et cetera, that are to me, such an interesting part of what makes anything great music, great art, great theater, and great food.
Yeah. And what I find just so brilliant is that, rather than, opening up a franchise or making bigger, going bigger, and going through that model, you chose to develop this new independent businesses
Mm-hmm.
and rooted in, that local community feel, but yet they all work together. So,
Yeah.
take us back there to that moment when you kind of decided, like, this is an idea that we can actually work. Because, like, a lot of my listeners might be saying, well, that's great, but, like, how does one come up with that? Or, like, why would we do that versus, like, going bigger and,
Yeah, well, I think it's important for people to do what they want to do. I mean, if the franchise model appeals to people, I mean, more power to them, go for it. I don't think it's a terrible thing. It's just not interesting to me. The visioning process that we use is very much an inside out process. And I didn't go to business school, but it's very different than the business school model, which I think is pretty outside in, where you're trying to figure out the right thing you should do or what the hole in the market is. And I don't think that's bad, but this is much more about what do we want to create and how do we want to go to work at a particular point in the future. And so when we write a vision, it's really a much more detailed description. So we just finished our so the one I described was written in 93 and 94 for 2009. And in 06 and 07, we wrote the next one, which was for 2020. And then we started in, I think, 2018 to write the 2032 vision, which will put us at 50 years in business. And we were about to formally roll it out after sharing around 1 million drafts inside the organization a year ago, late March. And of course, that didn't happen. So we just finally had the town hall meeting to formally kick it off. It wasn't a big shock since everybody pretty much had seen drafts of it throughout, but to formally say, here's where we're going. So that one's about 10 pages long. So it's emotionally engaging. It's descriptive. It really talks about the future you want to create. And if that future includes franchises or going public, I mean, more power to people, but those aren't things that really interest me or get my passion going.
Yeah, you have some friends.
I have some dogs barking at the FedEx driver.
Oh, don't you love that? Like, it's either the mailman or the Amazon Prime truck.
Oh yeah,
I know that's like in my home too.
It was so quiet this morning that I decided I would risk doing this from my house. But
that's great. Yeah, so it sounds like, what I think is very, it sounds like you have an intrinsic process of looking, as a company inward first, and then basing the idea, that purpose, and then making that vision come to life through that. Where did that originate through? Like, how did you come up with your visioning process?
Well, we didn't come up with it really. We learned it as we did so many other things that we do. This we learned through an amazing guy named Stash Kazmierski. I could try to spell it for you later if you want, but he used it on me and Paul in 1993. At that time, he was a consultant with a firm called Dana Miller Tyson, which was known all over the country for its progressive organizational change methodologies. And I don't have an office, but I could understand that they got tired of sitting in office, so they would walk down the block and come have coffee and hang out and have their meetings at the deli all the time. And so that's how we got to know him. And he, I now know, had learned the process originally from a guy named Ron Lippitt, who had been at the University of Michigan Institute of Social Research in the late 50s, 60s, and 70s and early 80s. And he had developed this process. He called it preferred futuring. We sort of have adapted it a bit, and we call it visioning. But basically, his work came out of trying to help community groups to come to a collaborative agreement on where they were going. And they would typically start with the very commonly still used problem-solving meetings that people get into where, here's this challenge we have, where do we get the money or whatever. And inevitably, even though things might start quickly with creative ideas, pretty soon they would sort of degenerate into, well, that's not going to work. We tried that. You'll never get the budget. You'll never get that approved by this department or that department or whatever. And Ron Lippitt's, kind of genius or insight was to say, forget the problem and forget what's wrong right now. Just plant your minds collectively in the future, and let's describe what it's going to be like, assuming that we do get the money and we do get approval, et cetera, et cetera. And what they found is that people became more energized, and collaboration went up, the creativity went up, everything got better. And so that's really the process that Stosh learned from him. Stosh taught it to us. And then at that time in 93, he used it on us. Like I said, I couldn't have explained it to you, but now we teach it to everybody. I've written, as you said, a ton about it. And we use it not just for the organization, but for everything. So it's really an approach to life. And so people who learn it, whether it's people who work here or through Zingerman, which is their training business, or the business books, start to use it frequently for their home lives, for their marriages, for their kids, for vacations, really whatever it might be.
That's amazing. Yeah. That's where it starts. You have to have a vision before. How can you get anywhere?
I think that's really a big piece of it, is that it's excuse me, in part one of the Guide to Good Leading, which is building a better business. I wrote an essay called 12 Natural Laws of Business, which is my belief that all healthy organizations and really all thriving individuals are living in harmony with those natural laws, even though they may not use the terminology. That's what they're doing. And the first one on the list is about vision, because really anybody who creates anything has to have had some vision of what they're going after. And it's my belief, really, that it's a natural human process that we all know how to do when we're 6, but then society pressures us to conform and we sort of forget how to do it. And this is, a few people keep doing it, but this is really a way to teach it to everybody.
That's awesome. And I love that your books they're not specifically for businesses, they're for everyone. So it really lends to this humanity. Like, here's a way to better your life, better your business. It really ties into the brand itself and what you've helped build.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I would not have understood early on, but now I have come to realize as I work more and more on models of living and working in business in harmony with nature and human nature, and then we got a long way to go, but to doing it better with the planet too, is that all of these approaches that we use, it's not just the visioning, but our work around energy management and collaboration and all the anarchist stuff I write about. It's very much, I would suggest, aligned with human nature. And I think a lot of the typical industrial model business stuff is actually antithetical to nature, and that creates a lot of tension. And like I said, that these are processes you can use at home, so that what we're teaching people and trying to practice imperfectly, of course, at work every day is the same practices that we want to do out of work.
Yep. And, back in 2009, when you were in this vision planning session, leading up to this moment, where were you at in your life? Like, what was going on? And I know it was a collaboration of thinking around this idea of, you know, uh, local community businesses. But give me an idea of what was going on with you.
Well, I mean, 1993 and 94 when we wrote it. So we'd been in business for about 12 years. And I wouldn't have been able to tell you this at the time. Paul had, I think, kind of an intuitive sense of it, but it was a stage that is not uncommon in business and life. In a sense, you could equate it to a midlife
Right.
in your personal life or finishing college or whatever. Like you attained this thing that everybody thought you couldn't do, and then you realize once you get there, it's actually not done. You're only at the beginning, and you got a long way of your life to go, and you're not really sure where you are. So my belief is that most people who start an organization, because it's true for nonprofits as well as for-profits, and it does well. I mean, they had a vision of what they wanted to create. It just, then they reach this stage where it's kind of done, but they don't really know what's next. And then there's a million things you can do. And one of the good problems that happens after you've had some success is people start throwing options and opportunities at you left and right. And you could do this, and I got a great lease for you here. And, and they're all legit. It's just, we use the metaphor of building a cathedral for visioning, that the vision is the cathedral that you're all collectively working to create. And it's a little bit like the cathedral got built, but the workmen keep coming. And so they just keep adding more and more to the site because, I don't know, having a pool out back sounds good, or they read an article that adding a second story over here increases property value. I mean, they're all legitimate things, but you end up losing the elegance and coherence of the original design, which is a lot of what made it so special.
Yeah, agreed. So kind of going back to the basics, and what values were present in you in that time that kind of helped to develop this strategy? Because it's a different way of thinking about something. So I'm just curious, sort of what was present.
Well, I mean, it's a long time ago now, so I don't know exactly what was present, but I mean, I think the values essentially stay the same. It's just the question is, what are you going to do with them? And, you could, I mean, on a personal level, you could have 10 kids or you could have no kids. You could live in Ann Arbor, you could live in Alaska, or you could live in West Africa. I mean, they're all legit. It's just getting, and there's advantages and disadvantages to all of them. So this is really just about getting clear what's in your heart about the kind of life you want to lead, in this case, collectively, and then creating that. So like, how do the employees who work in your business feel? How do you feel about going to work? What gets you excited? Because you can do anything. I mean, I have a lot of advantages in life. Not like I came from a wealthy family, but I mean, just growing up in a middle-class family with access to college and growing up in a learning setting and all those kind of things. So, I don't mean anybody can just go from extreme poverty to wealth in a week. That's not going to happen. There's a lot of systemic and cultural barriers that they got to overcome. But my point is just, if we start out in business, we can make it big, we can keep it small. I mean, there's a lot to be said for a wonderful small 25-seat restaurant. And there's a lot to be said for having 100 of them, if that's what you want to do. I mean, they're just totally different jobs.
Yep. Yeah. And what was it that made you decide to go that route? Like, I know you said you kind of looked at like your values and kind of looked at what you were thinking, but around that time, what was it about that type of model that was appealing for you and still is for the company?
Well, I think in a lot of ways, I was happy to just stay with what we had and keep making it better. I mean, we've always been about trying to make everything better all the time. And like I said, we had I didn't say, but we had expanded the building twice. And, I guess I always still to this day feel like when you're drawn to something really unique and special, it's an amazing experience, that whether that's an architectural monument or a piece of art or music or whatever, it's the things that really resonate with you in a special way, and not just what's convenient. Like if you get in the elevator, there might be music playing and you might like it, but I doubt that it's like the thing that really hits you in an emotionally meaningful way. And that's the kind of business that we wanted to have. Paul, on the other hand, wanted to grow. And then I always liked this uniqueness. So it was really trying to come up with a creative way to combine the idea of how we could grow with how we could retain that creative uniqueness. And that's what we came up with.
That's awesome. And the community aspect had a huge part in that as well, correct?
Yeah, again, I mean, I feel super strongly, more so even now than then, but just about doing business in the place that you are. I've been working a lot on the idea of organization as ecosystem. And so just the whole idea of you're in a place. I mean, my girlfriend has an amazing little sustainable farm. She has a hoop house and a little bit of land around it, and she grows everything from seed, all heirlooms, hand waters everything. I mean, it's fantastic. And we buy some of her produce, and she sells to other restaurants. But like nobody calls her and goes like, "I want to, Tammy, I want to open 200 of these around the country. This is awesome." Like, doesn't make any sense because the soil where she's growing is not, and the climate is completely different than if you open in another place. And so the idea that businesses are just plopped down with no real regard other than slightly, arranging things for the location, maybe a little bit, but with all due respect, I mean, pick whatever your chain of whatever is. I mean, Best Buy in Alaska is not really, I don't think, much different than Best Buy in Alabama. And, maybe that's convenient for people, but it's not the kind of work I want to do. And when I think of musicians I'm drawn to or art that I'm drawn to, it's really the people who are doing stuff that's really true to who they are.
Yeah, absolutely. Very love it. Well said. Well said. As I'm an artist as well, so I can truly understand that. And there's this sense of authenticity, and I think what you're talking about in a lot of ways too is this ecosystem of businesses. And have you, you know, have you talked a little bit more about that in some of your books, or about how to build something like that and to take in all of the elements, like you're talking about? It's not just about planning something down anywhere. It's about looking at
Yeah.
how everything's integrated, interconnected.
Yeah. Well, I wrote some about it in the introduction to part 4, which is the power of beliefs in business, because I started to think the whole book is, or the core of the book is about beliefs. So not necessarily really religion, sports, and politics, which are 3 areas of belief people like to talk about a lot.
Yeah.
But more beliefs about human beings, about ourselves, about what leadership means, about how much work is too much work, working Sunday or not working Sunday, work, all we have beliefs about everything. And what we believe is driving our behaviors and driving our relationships and driving our decisions. And most of us don't even know it. And it turns out, of course, beliefs are not genetic. They're all learned. And essentially we learn from our families, but also our friends, from the media, from people we admire. And what most of us, me included, until I started doing this work, don't realize is that we can actually choose the beliefs that we want, and we're not locked into the ones that other people gave us if they're not productive. And anyway, I started to look with that in mind at the idea of beliefs as metaphorically as roots, the root system of our lives, because you can't really see them, but everything that comes up above the surface we know is 100% correlated to those beliefs. And then the metaphor, just in a way that's congruent with the metaphor, kept growing. And I started to look at organizational culture as the soil, because if you plant the same plant in 2 different spots, if the soil's unhealthy in one and healthy in the other, you're going to get radically different results. I started to look at hope as the sun, because plants and people all move towards it no matter what. Spirit of generosity as moisture, et cetera, et cetera. And then that's where I wrote about it initially. And then I've continued to expand on it. And I was working on an essay to make into a pamphlet, but now it's becoming bigger still. And it's turning into a part 5 of the series.
That's great.
Which means, what the good news is, I'm very into the idea of it, and I keep teaching it more and more and developing it. The bad news is it's a lot of work to do a book, so it's not going to come out next week. But the e-news that I do, I've been trying to put stuff in there. And yesterday I wrote a piece that came out about humility, because I did a pamphlet in the fall about humility, and in the ecosystem metaphor, looking at it as humus or topsoil, because it's relatively thin layer, but if you lose it, not a lot good grows. And I think that's true socially, organizationally, and then clearly it's true in farming.
What do you think is one of the biggest challenges of creating, something like you've done with the independent businesses and community and the
Well, I think everything's hard. I mean, I think there's nothing great in life that's not hard. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, if you're in your relationship for 30 years, it's going to have hard times. I mean, if you're in business for 30 years, you're going to have hard times. There could even be a pandemic. I mean, so there's always difficulties. Natural law number 9 is that success means you get better problems. And so the point of the vision, in essence, is to choose the problems you want, right? So if I don't want the problem of building it up and selling it, and I mean, I'm not down on money, but having a lot of money, but not having a job and work that I really love is less interesting to me. So, and in the same way that, as a writer or a musician, that you would leave your work for people hopefully to appreciate long after you've left the planet, I would like to be able to do the same thing with the business.
Yep, absolutely. So there's something else that you touched on a little bit earlier around the sustainability issues and environmental initiatives that you've broken them down into 5 different categories. Can you tell us a little bit more about those and how you decided on that was something of value to the organization?
Well, I mean, I think clearly it's a big issue. It is not my area of expertise. Clearly, we need to do better. We've got a lot of people. Roger Bowser, one of the partners at the deli, has done a ton of work to lead our work group internally on it. One of the challenges of the pandemic has been in the restaurant end of what we do. I mean, there's so much more carry out, which is a good thing because it's helping us at least do some business during this challenging time. But then, of course, it increases the disposable use. So these are challenges that we have. I mean, and, we have a mail order business that is great. And actually is the one, like I said, it's booming in the pandemic, but that it's hard to do that without boxes and cost of shipping and all those kind of things. So I think we're all in a position where we're trying to reevaluate how we live and what we do. Like, I don't have an office and our businesses are all over town. So I drive, not long distance, but I'm in my car, going from one to the next, not all day, but I don't know how to get around in a small town without a car.
Right.
Where I gotta, I'm hauling all my stuff with me because I don't have an office. So these are real life challenges that I think are clearly things we want to work on. I was excited to see General Motors announce a couple weeks ago or last month that they were going to pursue electric vehicles passionately. And I think technology clearly can be used in ways that can help us.
Absolutely. Yeah. We can't escape this, right? These issues, like, they're eventually going to catch up with us.
Yeah. And I'm a city kid from Chicago, so this is not how I grew up. I didn't know any of this stuff. Although I will say, in hindsight, my mother used to recycle a long time ago. but part of the work around the anarchist stuff is realizing, like, a lot of the challenges that have occurred in nature. And I wrote a little bit about this, and I don't claim to be the world's expert, but a little bit about it yesterday in the piece, is just the lack of humility that we have as human beings is what translates into looking at the planet as this tool or resource for us to use to our benefit, as opposed to what I think is more accurate, which is that we're part of the ecosystem. We may have a higher level of awareness or creative ability to think creatively about solutions and positive outcomes, but the reality is we are part of the ecosystem. So we're not the paternalistic parent or whatever that's supposed to take care of it. We're a part of it. And so every action that we take impacts the ecosystem, and then we're impacted by the ecosystem.
Yep, mutually. It's mutual. So tell us a little bit more about the open book management. I know that some companies would cringe at that fact of, sharing financials with everyone in the company. They might think you're crazy, but tell us about how you decided to do that and sort of what's been the benefit to that.
Well, that's it. Open book is a good example of beliefs. So the belief that you shouldn't show your employees the numbers is just a belief. Like,
right. Where did that come from?
Well, if you flip the belief around, then the old model looks crazy, because the idea of having employees in business that don't know how the business is doing, to me, seems kooky. it's
How are they
it's a little
supposed
bit
to?
like you're the coach of the basketball team,
Yeah,
and and the players don't know the score, only you do.
right, right.
And
That's
then
a
you're
great.
yelling at them to play harder all the time. And they think they're winning by 30, and they're losing by 20. And so I would say most business people, including us, we're struggling. I mean, even when it's going well, you're still not killing it, even though the public's perception of it, in the same way that, I don't know, whatever body weight issues or whatever things are projected in the media as being these ideal states, but the reality is hardly anyone's in them. and
Right, right.
and yet we're allowing ourselves to get programmed to think that that's the norm, and that there's something wrong with us if we're not there. And I don't mean we don't want to achieve at a high level. It's just most business owners are struggling at some level at some point.
Right.
And most employees have no clue that they're struggling, and so the employee becomes focused mostly on what they're not getting, and how much they perceive in their imagination that the business owner is squirreling away. And the truth is, everybody's struggling, and I would love to double the pay of everybody we employ tomorrow. It's just trying to figure out how to keep paying the bills. And when you're open book, they're part of that conversation. And of course, they'd love to double their own pay, but they understand if we double everybody's pay, they can look at the cash flow projection, and it's not rocket science. Every eighth grader could figure out you're going to run out of money.
Yeah. So at what point did you adapt to this? And
Yeah, so we went open book in the mid '90s. The key textbook on open book is Great Game of Business by Jack Stack and Bo Burlingham, and Paul and I read that, and then we started doing it. It probably took us 5-6 years to get pretty decent at it. And it's not like we're perfect, but we actually teach it through ZingTrain, our application of how to make it work.
that's great. That's awesome. So I'm sure it creates a sense of transparency, which, can only imagine the conversations and how they're elevated around the business, and the sort of the passion that people have knowing where they stand and where
Mm-hmm.
where everyone else stands, and sort of can you tell us a story maybe around that?
Well, I think I mean, the pandemic's a good example. I mean, we just this morning finished our monthly Zingerman's Wide Huddle. I mean, so some of the, like I said, mail order is doing really well. The bakehouse is doing solidly, awesomely well too. Not booming like mail order, but basically having a good, solid, normal year. And everybody else is challenged. I mean, but the reality is, then everybody knows who's challenged, and we understand the issues that are at play. And I think anybody, pick your metaphor, but I mean, nobody plays basketball wants to be down 20 at the half, but you can come back from it. And if you don't even know you're down 20, it's going to radically alter the way you play. And I think when people are challenged in a good way, they can come together and achieve at great levels with creative solutions and creative collaborations. And that's really the point of it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's amazing. And I think so many more companies will start to adapt this, hopefully. I think that the proof is there. It's just, like you said, it takes a while. What
Yep.
were
Most things do.
Yeah. What were those challenges in the beginning? I'm curious.
Well, I think that open book, I guess I would say, of all the stuff we teach, in some ways, it's one of the harder ones to integrate, because, like, if you learn our customer service training, you mentioned the service book,
Mm-hmm.
and if you have 100 employees, one can listen and no one else can do anything, and that one can already start to make a difference. But with open book, the owners, the leaders have to change their perspectives, obviously, because they need to start teaching everybody else how finance works, sharing the numbers, explaining the numbers, involving people in decision making. But the frontline people have to change just as much, because the reality is, I'm stereotyping, and I don't even know that somebody pointed out the word frontline is probably not even the best, but your team members. I mean, most of the country, most of the world that's working in jobs on the front of things, it's still used to blaming the owners, blaming the boss, and waiting for the heroic boss to swoop in and fix things. And this is where the boss is saying the truth. I don't know what to do either.
Right.
We got to figure it out together. And so it's really getting out of the parent-child relationship, which is an awesome relationship if you're the parent and you're the child. But in this case, we're equally intelligent human beings, and whatever angle you want to take, whether it's from my anarchist studies, I mean, there's no correlation between intelligence, creative ability, or anything else between hierarchical roles. So as the leader of the organization, I have a high level of responsibility, but it doesn't mean that the greatest idea of the week isn't going to come from the newest employee that we just hired to work the cheese counter at the deli.
Mm-hmm. Right. And that type of environment allows for that to come to the surface, for it to be heard.
Yeah. You're encouraging it, and it's still not perfect, but it's a start.
Right. Well, I would love to hear a little bit about the pamphlet Working Through Hard Times, Life and Leadership Learnings of 2020.
Yeah, sure.
I know you touched on the pandemic and sort of how it's influenced the organization and your leadership. So we'd love to kind of hear a little bit more about what inspired.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, I write this e-news every week, which Zingerman's, I'm sure you could put the link in the show notes, but zingermanscommunity.com is where people can sign up for it. And it also has the archive, so people can look back at older ones, but it comes out every Wednesday. And I don't know, I was thinking about the year as we approach the end of it. And I mentioned that humility pamphlet, which was probably 18 months in the works. And this pamphlet was really a much quicker sort of realization that there was merit to taking what was in my mind and my heart, and understanding that probably everybody has their own version of that going on, and putting it in print. And so it's written, the preface is written at the end of December. So it's like, okay, we're halfway through this pandemic. We got a long way to go. It's been a really difficult year. The introduction goes back to the beginning of it. So the first piece that I wrote all the way back in April, which was called Things Fall Apart, and what we were experiencing at that time. And then the other pieces that are in there are all things I wrote about during the course of the year in terms of trying to get through the pandemic and the pressures that go with it. So talking about dignity, talking about building hope in your organization, the visioning process that you asked about earlier, about picking up the phone and calling friends to stay grounded and connected, about the challenges of working through what we learned to call here the zone of doubt and blame, which is where the initial energy is long since dissipated, but you're a long way from the finish line. So those are tools that I wrote about journaling, which is a thing I do every morning. So it's stuff that helped me get through the year of 2020, but I realized they're really timeless tools. I mean, it's stuff that no matter what hard time, and we're going to have more hard times, whether it's personal, interpersonal, organizational, social, whatever, these are tools that I think get you through all of it. And then as a history major, I don't know, there's just something to me meaningful about sort of having something of the moment. And I realized it wasn't consciously why I decided to do it, but I realized as I was working on it, it's in a way, it's almost for myself as much as anybody else, because it's about getting my own emotion out there in a way that ultimately connects with others. And I think we all like to know we're not alone.
Yes, especially during the pandemic times.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will definitely link that in the notes below, and I look forward to reading it myself. I think that, I just think it's great, like you said, to have something to have a marker in time to look back and to emotionally connect with people right now, because they need that more than ever as we continue to move through all of this.
Yeah, and again, with all the books, we do all the design here. We print them here in town. We're sort of off the grid, but it's a little bit of the book version of farm to table. So just trying to, again, ground in the community and share a little bit of that in a helpful and productive way with others. So, and people can see them all on zingermanspress.com or zingtrain.com, both.
Awesome. So yeah, that was one thing that I wanted to mention earlier, but the 12 businesses, could you name them off so people understand sort of how?
Yeah, so the deli's still the core of all of it. The mail order we mentioned is zingermans.com. We ship food and stuff all over the country. Zing Train, we just mentioned, is our training business. Zingerman's Roadhouse is a sit-down restaurant that's all regional American food. Miss Kim is a little Korean restaurant that we have. Cornman Farms, we do like weddings and events, but that's a particularly challenging business, even worse than restaurants right now. We have a little food tour business, which is even worse than all of it because there's zero travel going on. So we're not doing any business there. Zingerman's Creamery, we make fresh cheese, so fresh handmade cream cheese, goat cheese, etc. Zingerman's Coffee, we roast coffee, obviously, and have a cafe. And Zingerman's Candy, we make little handmade candy bars. And then the bakehouse I mentioned earlier, we make everything from rye bread, European style breads, American breads, pastries, and we have a wonderful little shop there where we do quite a bit of retail too. And I think I'm forgetting something, but it's not really technically a business per se, but Zingerman's Press, we do all these books and pamphlets here in town, sort of old school.
Oh, wow. That's awesome. That's so great. I remember, I had the gelato. So when I came to Ann Arbor.
Yeah, we make that at the creamery. Yep.
Oh, so good. So anyone that's passing through or going through Ann Arbor needs to stop.
And we actually ship that too. So.
Oh, yes. And yes, sir. And I'll link your website below as well. So if someone wants to order
okay, great.
online, I can personally attest to the gelato. What advice would you give a business leader who's looking to take their organization to new heights and think about how to best put their purpose and people first?
Well, I think the business books are written with that in mind. I mean, it's just stuff that I wish I would have known when I started, and I'm still learning more all the time, but it's just putting that in writing for people. I mean, I think the visioning that we talked about without question is super helpful. And then all these other pieces as well. And I think also, again, from learning a lot about anarchist thinking and getting out of the hierarchical thinking, which is how we're all raised, is just that there isn't just one thing. And, it's like somebody said, well, what's the key thing of having a healthy forest? It doesn't even make sense because we know that there's 100 things, 1,000 things that are all planned into it. And I think that the same thing is true for organizations, but at least if you have a vision of where you're going that you're inspired by, then the other things can get worked out en route because you're committed to a future of your own choosing, and people around you know what that is, and they're much better able to help you, and you're much better able to make decisions to go towards it.
That's awesome. And how can people come to follow you and your journey and the organization?
Well, like I said, I mean, the e-news I do is up at zingermanscommunity.com, and then on there too, I don't know what we have, probably like 30 different e-newses. Bake, I didn't mention earlier, as part of the Bakehouse is our baking school for home bakers. And one of the very few upsides of the pandemic is that all of our classes for Bake and for Zing Train are now online, which they weren't before. So people can sign up for any of those newsletters. And then my email is just ari@zingermans.com. And I am more than happy to have people just email directly with questions too.
That's awesome.
And then eventually they could come visit.
Yes.
One day this will be over after we get vaccinated.
Yes, exactly. And I feel like we could talk about so many other things. This is just like the touch of the iceberg here. But thank you so much for your time. And I, again, will list all the information below in the notes so people will be able to easily find you and hopefully have the Zingerman's experience, whether it's there in Ann Arbor or in their own home.
Okay. That sounds great. And we can do another interview down the road too.
Yes, absolutely. And I would love to hear more, about your journaling and
well, there's a lot so that's a lot in Zingerman's Guide to Good Leading Part 3, which is on managing ourselves. And then also you mentioned that I think you said you're an artist, and there's a little pamphlet I did a couple of years ago called The Art of Business, which is about my belief that business and life are very much like art or music or poetry, and that the more we would approach what we do in that vein, the more mindful, intentional, nuanced we would be in what we do every day.
Oh, that's amazing. I fully agree. You're talking my
so
language.
You're going to have a lot of reading ahead of you.
Yes, so much.